We have The Clue in the Diary. We are on Chapter 5, A Dangerous Detour. As soon as the morning's chores were finished, Nancy and Hannah Gruen set out on a bus for Oscar Peterson's bakery. Entering the clean little shop, fragrant with the odor of freshly baked bread, they were disappointed not to see the Swedish owner at the counter. "Is Mr. Peterson in?" Nancy asked the girl at the counter. The young woman shook her head. "He's in bed upstairs, ill." "Oh, I'm so sorry," said Nancy. "Give him our best wishes and tell him we hope he'll be well soon." "Oh, Mr. Peterson expects he'll feel good enough to come down the shop this afternoon," the girl told her. "Fine," Nancy replied. "I'll be back." After Mrs. Gruen had bought some rolls, she and Nancy left the shop with the diary still in Nancy's big purse. Although disappointed, Nancy said, "Oh well, I'll see Mr. Peterson later in the day." Back home, Nancy again looked through the diary, hopeful of learning something from it. As she was puzzling over the blurred, cramped English, a word suddenly caught her eye. "It's part of an address!" Nancy cried, highly elated. "I'm certain of it!" Getting her father's magnifying glass from the desk, Nancy held it above the blurred writing, then read the words, "Riverwood Cottage, Sandy Creek." Nancy stared at the address. "The Swensons!" she thought excitedly. The young detective telephoned George and Bess and asked them to come over. When the cousins arrived, she rushed them into the living room and showed them the address. "Riverwood Cottage, Sandy Creek!" Bess exclaimed. "That's where the Swensons live." "Boy, this certainly complicates matters," George declared. Nancy nodded, knowing she'd stumbled on a valuable, yet disturbing clue. Could it be that Honey's father was the man who had set fire to the Raybould home? If so, what motive could he have had? Intuition warned Nancy that the clue might lead to heartbreak for Honey and her mother. Nancy's face was so troubled that Bess and George begged for her to tell them what she was thinking. Nancy revealed her concern for the Swensons, and also told about the ring Ned had left with her. She then pointed to the Sandy Creek notation. "So far, this is the only clear-cut clue the diary has yielded," Nancy sighed. "But I hate to think what it may mean." Bess and George nodded soberly. "I can't imagine what Honey's father could have to do with the fire," Bess declared. "Yet everything fits in. The strange man you saw running away, the finding of the ring with the Swedish inscription near the hedge." "We don't know it belongs to him," Nancy said quickly. "Remember, there's a D on it, and his initials are J and S." "Well, the diary must belong to Mr. Swenson, or someone who knows him," George said. "Otherwise his address wouldn't be in it. I wonder what he's like." "I wish we could meet him," Nancy returned gravely. She mentioned her futile phone call to the Swenson home. "What are you going to do about the diary?" Bess questioned curiously. "Turn it over to the police?" "No, I'll keep it until I can get a translation and find out whether or not it means trouble for the Swensons." "Of course, this is only circumstantial evidence," George reflected. "We're not certain the man you saw is Swedish, although, according to your description, he could be." "If he is Mr. Swenson and he is guilty of setting the fire, I suppose he'll have to be brought to justice," Bess spoke up worriedly. "I agree," said Nancy quietly. "But somehow I can't believe that Honey's father would do a thing like that. She's such a sweet little thing, and her mother is a lovely person." "I'd hate to get them involved, no matter what," George declared feelingly. "I'm afraid they don't have enough to eat as it is, and if the father should go to prison—" "Let's try to take an optimistic view," Nancy said. "Perhaps neither the diary nor the ring is Mr. Swenson's, or if they are, he may have a perfectly blameless reason for having been on the Raybould grounds." "I think you're right about working this puzzle out by yourself, Nancy," George commented. "You've had wonderful success in your other mysteries. This may be your chance to help Honey and her mother." "I wish my car were ready now." "When will it be?" Bess asked. "Not until later today. I'll tell you what. Let's walk to the garage. It won't do any harm to spur the mechanic on a bit. When we come back, we can stop at Dad's office and ask him if he has traced the Rayboulds. He promised to try." At the garage, the girls were dismayed to learn that the repairs on the convertible were only half finished. The mechanic, however, assured Nancy that the car would be ready by mid-afternoon. The girls stopped a few minutes at a department store where Bess bought some kitchen spoons for her mother. Then they continued to Carson Drew's office. As usual, the lawyer was busy, but he found time to chat with his daughter and her friends. "I had my secretary try to get in touch with Mr. Raybould," he told Nancy, "but so far she hasn't been able to locate him, or his wife. They seem to have vanished." "Maybe Felix Raybould has gone into hiding," Nancy suggested with a wry smile. "Oh, I have no doubt he'll be heard from once the news reaches him that his house has been ruined," Mr. Drew said. I'll keep trying to locate him." It was nearly 12 o'clock when the girls left the lawyer's office. Bess and George said they must go home to luncheon. "Come have a bite with me," Nancy urged. "Then we can all go see Mr. Peterson, if you don't mind taking the bus." George and Bess eagerly accepted the invitation. They were as curious as Nancy concerning the contents of the diary. Hannah Gruen served a delicious meal, and it was nearly 3 o'clock before the girls finally boarded a bus to call on the Swedish baker. "I'm dying to know what the diary says," George declared enthusiastically. "I hope it won't make things look any worse for Honey's father," Bess murmured apprehensively. As they alighted near the bakery, the girls were distressed to see an ambulance parked directly in front of the shop. A small group of spectators had gathered. "There's been an accident!" Nancy exclaimed, quickening her step. "Oh, I hope nothing has happened to dear old Oscar Peterson." The girls reached the bakery at the same moment that the ambulance drove away, siren wailing. "What happened?" Nancy asked a woman who was standing near the door of the shop. "Was someone hurt?" "It was Mr. Peterson. He had a relapse, and the doctor ordered him to the hospital. Expect he'll be there a few days." "How dreadful," said Bess. "But Nancy, what will you do about the diary now?" Nancy, mainly concerned about the kindly baker, did not answer immediately. Finally, she suggested they ask the baker's assistant if she knew of anyone who understood Swedish. The woman gladly called several people, but none were at home. Nancy even phoned her father to see if he could recommend someone, but Mr. Drew was not at his office. The girls were a little discouraged, but Nancy said, "We can still work out this mystery. My car should be finished by this time. If it is, we can drive over and visit Honey and her mother." "That's a swell idea," Bess and George chorused. When they reached the garage, the girls were overjoyed to find the convertible ready. "Looks almost good as new," Nancy said, pleased. "I'll write a check for the amount." To her chagrin, she had forgotten her checkbook. "That's all right," the mechanic said. "I'm very busy anyhow. I'll make out a bill later and drop it off at your house." "Fine," Nancy said with a smile. Then she and the cousins phoned their homes from an outside booth to report their destination. A few minutes later, they set off on the highway for Sandy Creek. Nancy slowed as she drove past the Raybould estate. The girls glanced at the charred ruins of the once beautiful mansion. "I wish we had time to stop and talk to the men investigating the cause of the fire," Nancy said. "But we'd better get to the Swensons first." About 10 miles farther on, Nancy came to a sawhorse across the road. So sawhorse is like a piece of wood, usually on little legs, and it's indicating like you can't go any farther. Detour, George groaned. Must have been put up yesterday. "It isn't for very long," Bess declared optimistically. "I can see the end of it." The road had been closed to permit the construction of a new steel bridge. The bypass wound down into a valley, crossing the Muskoka River a quarter of a mile south. "We'll lose time on this dirt road," Nancy remarked, turning into the detour. "Poor car! He'll be lucky to get through without jolting to pieces." The road was ungraded, and recent rains had left it ruddy. In addition, it was narrow, with hardly any places wide enough for 2 cars to pass. Even though Nancy drove slowly, the ride was still a bumpy one. "Good way to break a spring on a road like this," she declared. "Or a bone," Bess added wryly. A moment later, the girls became aware of a loud, insistent honking behind them. "Big truck right in back of you, Nancy," George observed. "I know. Well, the driver will just have to wait. He can't pass me on this narrow stretch." But the blowing of the truck's horn continued until Nancy became irritated, then indignant. What is the matter with that man? Nancy increased her speed, hoping to leave the impatient driver behind. But he speeded up, keeping close to the convertible. Honk, honk, honk. If he doesn't stop that, I'll scream, Bess complained. And if we could go any faster, I'll lose all my teeth. The convertible was now bumping up and down unmercifully. George turned around in her seat to glare at the horn-blowing driver. Don't give him an inch, she told Nancy. Wouldn't do him any good if I did. His truck's too big to pass, and I'm certainly not going to a ditch to let him get by. I'll have to wait until we reach the end of this detour. What's his big hurry anyhow? George grumbled. Probably just trying to make us nervous. Well, he's certainly succeeding so far as I'm concerned, Bess said. Just then, the girls came within sight of the wooden bridge, the end of the tortuous road. Thank goodness, Bess cried. With the truck still bearing down on the convertible, Nancy drove it onto the bridge. Doesn't look very safe, Bess remarked uneasily. No wonder they're building a new bridge. It doesn't sound safe either, George cried out as the loose planks creaked alarmingly under the weight of the car. If that truck tries to pass us, we'll all crash through. But at that moment, the girls heard the heavy truck clatter onto the wooden planks. He's crazy, George exclaimed. This bridge will never hold us both. The words were barely out of her mouth when came a cracking, splintering sound. Nancy! Bess shrieked. Look out! Oh no,